All right, hello and welcome to our class. Today we are going to be learning about text to self connections, and we are going to be doing a read aloud on a specific book. So if you could go ahead and join the Nearpod, this is the code, and that's what we're going to be doing today. So I want to give you a second to go ahead and join the Nearpod. Okay, so that should be everybody. So today, like I said, we're going to be doing a read aloud. We're going to be reading one of my personal favorite books, and it is called A Relative Came by Cynthia Wright. Today, we're going to read the book, and it is about a family that went on a road trip. So, whenever we look at on the title, we see that the word relatives. Does anybody know what the word relatives mean? So a relative is a family member. So for an example, I have relatives in California. So those would be my family that I have from out of town. So while we look at the book, does anyone know what we think the book might be about just by looking at this picture? Yes. So on this picture on the cover, we see a car and they look like they're having a great time. I want to ask a question. Has anybody went out of town to visit any family? I know summer's coming up. Yes, that's very cool. I have went out of town too, as I told you guys earlier. I have family that's in California. I have family that's in Dallas. So I go to visit my relatives all the time. So in this book, we're going to be learning about a family, and while we're doing the read aloud, I want you to make personal connections. So when I think about personal connections, these are things that you can relate to something whenever you read the book or you read the text. So, for an example, me and my best friend have a connection because we both have younger siblings. So, whenever you're reading the book, I want you to think about the connections that you may have with the book, just any personal connections that you have that relate to the text. So, without further ado, let's start our read aloud.
It was the summer of the year when the relatives came. They came up from Virginia. They left when their grapes were nearly purple enough to pick, but not quite. They had an old station wagon that smelled like a real car, and in it they put an ice chest full of soda pop and some boxes of crackers and some bologna sandwiches, and up they came from Virginia.
So I want to pause real quick. Let's think about what Virginia is. So Virginia is a state. We currently live in Texas, and Virginia is a state. So I'm gonna actually show you guys a picture of the state of Virginia on the map. Give me 1 second. So this is the state of Virginia on a map. So this is where they're gonna go.
They left at 4 in the morning when it was still dark, before even the birds were awake. They drove all day long and into the night, and while they traveled along, they looked at the strange houses and different mountains, and they thought about their almost purple grapes back home. They thought about Virginia, but they thought about us too, waiting for them. So they drank up all their pop and ate up all their crackers and traveled up all those miles until finally they pulled into our yard.
So it says they drank up all their pop. and they ate up all their crackers. So we know what crackers are. We eat crackers all the time. But I want to know, does anybody know what pop is? It's kind of a funny word, huh? No, it's not someone's dad. So it's actually a soda. So since they are from Virginia, they have a different dialect, so they talk differently. And up there, to instead of saying soda, they say pop. So pop is just another word for soda that people use.
Then it was hugging time. Talk about hugging. Those relatives just passed us all around their car, pulling us up against their wrinkled Virginia clothes, crying sometimes. They hugged us for hours. Then it was into the house and so much laughing and shining faces and hugging in the doorways. You'd have to go through at least 4 different hugs to get from the kitchen to the front room. Those relatives.
Has anyone ever went out of town to see their relatives? Yeah. You see how everyone's hugging, everyone's having a good time.
And finally, after a big supper, 2 or 3 times around until we all got a turn at the table, there was quiet talk, and we were in 2s and 3s through the house. The relatives weren't particular about beds, which was good since there weren't any extras, so a few squeezed in with us, and the rest slept on the floor. Some with their arms thrown over the closest person, or some with an arm across one person and a leg across another. It was different going to sleep with all that new breathing in the house. The relatives stayed for weeks and weeks. They helped us tend the garden, and they fixed any broken things they could find. They ate up all our strawberries and melons, then promised we could eat up all their grapes and peaches when we came to Virginia. But none of us thought about Virginia much. We were so busy hugging and eating and breathing together. Finally, after a long time, the relatives loaded up their ice chest and headed back to Virginia at 4 in the morning. We stood there in our pajamas and waved them off in the dark. We watched the relatives disappear down the road, then we crawled back into our beds that felt too big and too quiet.
So on this page, how do we think that they felt that their relatives were leaving? Yeah, pretty sad, huh? I know sometimes I get sad whenever I leave my relatives too.
We fell asleep. And the relatives drove on all day long and into the night. And while they traveled along, they looked at the strange houses and different mountains, and they thought about their dark purple grapes waiting at home in Virginia. But they thought about us, too, missing them, and they missed us. And when they were finally home in Virginia, they crawled into their silent, soft beds and dreamed about the next summer. The relatives in this story.
So we were able to read the book, The Relatives Came, and I just want to know, who can tell me what's one thing that made you think about your family in this book? So actually, I'm gonna let you turn and talk to your neighbor, and then go ahead and tell me what you guys came up with. Yes, that is. I like that. Sometimes we do have different family that live out of state, so it could definitely be hard. So, I have one more question. Whenever your family get together, like in the book that we saw, they were having a dinner. Does anyone have a tradition that they do with their family? Okay, you guys celebrate the Chinese New Year? That's awesome. So now that we've read The Relative Came, we're going to go ahead and try to make a connection. So on the next Nearpod, I want you guys, for our activity, to draw a picture of you and your relatives doing something. So it could be a trip to Disney, it could be a trip to Austin, it could even be a trip to the grocery store. Just anything that you have done with your family that you would like to share, and a personal connection that you also felt with the book. So, for an example, me and my family always go on a plane. So, I'm going to draw a plane. So, I'm going to draw my clouds. And don't judge my drawing. So, this is a plane. So that's me and my family on the plane. So if you have any text to self connections that you have with the book, go ahead and put them down. But today we were able to make text to self connections by looking at the book The Relative Game.